everybody. Round two. We've asked Gary here to do a talk on the Spine of Albion and some of the ancient knowledge or the ancient civilizations, our forebearers' tales. So we're going to do about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half, and try and keep the questions maybe till the end. So let's listen and say thank you for Gary. And say.
I hope you can all hear me. The Spine of Albion. Albion, as some of you will know, is the old name for the whole of our island. Scotland and England, a united country. Albion is the old name for Britain. Okay, and the Welsh. All three. We're talking about the Iron Age times when a king of Britain, such as one of the line of Brutus, would have overall kingship of all three states, of Cymru, Logria and Alba, the three states. But Albion, for me, has always been a name for the whole three of them. Sorry, Wales, England and Scotland. It means the White Island. It also, white means wit or holy, sceptred, shining bright. So the spine of the Holy Isle. And since I was very little, I was always having dreams and messages and communications from the land and telling me to go to places where I would find things. And a lot of these incidences I had to keep to myself because everyone would think I was going mad. But I had some connection with the land since I was very young. And I soon recognised that there was a kind of spirit of the land that communicates through us. For those who actually go out into the countryside and spend time there, and walk the paths, like Lawrence says, things happen to you. And it's true, when you start, strange things, either synchronicities, the people you meet on the way, but for me it was even more mystical because I was getting dreams about certain places being very places of power. And on a pilgrimage of the mythical line, which Lawrence mentioned, this is the line that runs along the axis of southern Britain. In fact, it's the longest line east-west through Britain. I think I'll show you that slide. It's a miracle in a way, and this is the thing. Is it nature or is it man that's created such an axis of power? Because it is actually the longest line you can strike east-west through anywhere in Britain, in Wales, England. So. And just so happens that on this extremely long line that you could strike from Land's End to Norfolk Coast are the great spiritual centres of Avebury, Glastonbury, St Michael's Mount and Bury St Edmunds. So that means that people like John Michel thought it must be that man knew about this route, and because Avebury is a man-made place. Glastonbury Tor isn't, that's a natural feature, but enhanced by man. St Michael Mount is the natural feature. So people have added to it over the years. And it's become an alignment of sites. Now, whether there were great geometers in the past and surveyors who built places upon this ancient long route is the question. And it's something I wanted to find out, whether it was the spirit of nature communicating with man, the landscape communicating through us, and through our instincts building a place at a certain site. And thereby subliminally or subconsciously connecting with the spirit of the land and not knowing it. And I discovered this on a little island just opposite where I live, at Portland. And Portland's only a little island about 1.5 miles long by 1.25 wide off the coast of Dorset. But it's full of anomalies. It's full of, it used to have 7 stone circles before they quarried them out. But what I noticed that there was a huge number of churches on the island for such a small island. And that these churches all conformed from the, in the air to sacred geometry. But most of all, there were 6 churches and natural features in a line facing the pole star, which we know is a polar axis or a meridian. And the interesting thing is that all these churches were built at different times, in different centuries, and often people would had donated their land after their death and given it to the church to build upon. And so the more I researched, I thought, aha, this has to be Masons, Freemasons, because the island, this tiny little island, has 5 Masonic lodges. So I thought, aha, the Masons are behind it. They're creating sacred geometry to empower their temples or whatever. No, that didn't work out. I met lots of Masons, Freemasons, stonemasons. None of them had any idea about this meridian line, or that these churches were built in a straight line, because half of them are not intervisible between each other because the island's on a slope. So in the end, it turned out that I realized that the spirit of the island, and it's a big story, was communicating with people subconsciously, or some kind of divine guidance was making them create this line. And then I discovered a landscape giant such as this that had manifested an aerial photographs, and its detail was perfect. Its hips, its legs, its arms, its face. But when I researched it, I discovered that the beard, the last part of the figure, was only formed in 2012 when somebody cut a new road through the quarry. So in fact this figure began in 1600 and ended in 2012. And nobody had an idea what was going on. Everybody's going about their everyday business, doing all everyday things, but they're creating something, and they didn't know about it. So, although Jean-Michel and a lot of people would say, you know, there were great geometrists in the past who worked on these lines and created all these buildings and sites, it may have been done through subconscious connections with the landscape itself. So, with this in mind, walking along the mythical line, I had an idea that if this is the longest east-west line through Britain, has all these sacred temples on them, perhaps there's a north-south line that has all sacred temples on them, bisecting it somewhere. And it was on this journey that I came to a Glastonbury bookshop, and our first book I picked out, Brigantia, a Mysteriography by Guy Raglan Phillips, written in 1976. He spoke about an alignment he discovered while he was researching the folklore between Carlisle and Manchester in the old Brigantia around the Iron Age realm. And he found that all the lines, the north, south, east, west lines, and this is what I mean by lines on a map that he was finding, alignments of sites, or lays as Lawrence says, they pivot on this main axis that connects the city of Carlisle and Manchester, Birmingham, down to Winchester. So when I looked at this line, I thought, well, that's interesting, but it's not really Glastonbury, Avebury, St Michael's Mount, it's Birmingham, Manchester, Carlisle. So I thought, there's not sacred temples, they're places of physical power, you know, places of manufacture, places where man has created things in a way and been very successful, because Manchester and Birmingham are the 2 great industrial capitals of the Western world. Not anymore, but they used to be. Nearly everything at one time was made in Birmingham or Manchester. Your clothing would be from Manchester, and everything in your house would be from Manchester. Birmingham. So, and then of course Winchester was the old capital of England, so I thought that's interesting, before London. And Dunfermline was the old capital of Scotland before Edinburgh, so I thought, well, the capital of Scotland, the capital of England is on this line. And Carlisle was the old capital of the north during Roman early Saxon times. So I thought there's something here, so I looked into it a bit more and then travelled a lot. And on my travels I'd met Aborigines and the Hopi Indians and these sort of Aboriginal peoples, and attended their talks and lectures, listened to what they had to say. And they always talked about, the elders would say that there are lines and there are alignments or directions, sacred directions. And the east-west directions were spiritual and the north-south were physical. So I thought, oh, well, this north-south line is physical places of power. This made a lot of sense, because the Michael line connecting all these spiritual places, the high places of the church, and Avebury and Glastonbury, very spiritual places. So this felt like a physical counterpart to this east-west spiritual axis. And then I also noticed that on this line there were hidden places of power that weren't apparent at first, like Meon Hill, which is an ancient word for the middle hill of England. And geographically, Meon Hill is almost the centre of the old kingdom of England and Wales. Barbican was also an ancient site that had a stone circle on the top, had an Iron Age hill fort. And it was one of those places of power that's been forgotten and destroyed over the centuries, and now it's just a place where people go for picnics. But Barbican was a place of power. Even more so now it appears on this axis of these physical places of power. The Cloud, a great eminence in Cheshire, is also like Glastonbury Tor to the locals there. I mean, it's incredible that the amount of sacredness, they talk about Glastonbury Tor and all its connections and spiritual messages, but the same thing can be found at the Cloud in Alderley Edge. Shap, great prehistoric temple that was destroyed. Very little remains now apart from the stone, which I'll show you later. Hooley Hill, a prehistoric centre, one of the Stonehenge of the Edinburgh area, destroyed but few stones remaining. Dunkeld, where the kings of Scotland and the Christian centre at one time, Blair Athol, the kingship centre, Lerg. So there are all these centres. Lerg is the centre of Sutherland. So I felt I had something here, enough to sort of research it. But Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst were the great dowsers of the mythical line, and they discovered, as Hamish was saying, these. Because Hamish thought that, okay, if it's a straight line, I can dowse it. So he set off dowsing it from where it began, and found it wandered off. It wandered off to a holy well, and it went through a holy well into a lake, a cave. And he thought, well, and Paul was following him and saying, well, you know, your dowsing's rubbish. You're not sticking to the mythical line. You're going off somewhere. So, well, they sort of sat, thought about this, scratched their heads and thought, well, I'm picking up something genuine. So they thought, well, let's go with this, see what happens. So they did. And their journey was fascinating because they found that it was crossing another energy at certain places. And these places were places of power like Brentor, the Hurlers stone circles, Michael's Mount. And eventually discovered after going halfway up towards Royston that there was a feminine current that it was crossing with. And so there's this like male and female dragon energy. And actually, you remember yesterday we saw that amazing footage of the sun and the planets going around the sun. This is a kind of what happens, that the line is a straight projection and the currents are going around in a spiral form because the energy is going underground, overground, but you can still douse the line. So it is like a kind of DNA signature across the south of Britain. But is it man-made? Is it Mother Nature? This is the question. This is what I wanted to find out, because I found I could douse these lines because I followed Hamish's route and found I could physically douse and feel them. In fact, in Winchester not long ago, we took a party of people at the back of the cathedral and I said, just put your hands out, walk forward and tell me when you feel something. And they all felt at the same time, bang, wow, what is that? You know, they could feel these lines of power. They couldn't see them. And it's because you can't see them that the scientists and academics, you know, slam people like me saying it's all part of your imagination. And at first I thought, well, I'm going to get this kind of stick as well, so I'm not going to write about it. This is a great subject. I love it. I'm going to do it for myself and start from the beginning of this line and work my way up. If you want the technical thing, when you're dowsing it, these bands of energy, if you like, if you could see them, they're like tubes. They're like big tubes. They're almost circular, like something like these, but circular. And so the dowser will pass here, but the dowser won't sense that it's circular. And that's why they're called dragons, because dragon is a Greek word for serpent. And serpent is the original form, is how they look and how they wiggle through the countryside. They behave like serpents. And the Chinese understood this. But these tubes, if you like, can be broken down into this male and female currents, like an electrical cable with wires inside of them, but one flowing that way and one flowing that way, opposite to each other. Whoops. And where they meet, they go into the ground and come out again, forming this kind of Celtic cross, like this. And they have colours. You can actually douse the colours. The male current dows a golden sort of yellow colour, and the female colour dows the kind of violet on this particular line. And so if I did run into other lines of power as equal to mine, which you do, I had to check their colour, their width, just to distinguish which were our lines and which were theirs. So, but the communication I had with these lines, following them for years, enabled me to be more accurate and not get waylaid. So the Chinese depict the dragon force in this way. The female dragon here is violet in the depictions inside the valleys, because the female dragons tend to keep to watery places, valleys, feminine sort of sites, and the masculine, male currents keep the high places, rock features, standing stones, seem to be drawing them. Yeah?
You say you can't see these trans of energies. So how do you know what colour they are?
Because you, when you come to the energy itself, you have a colour disc that so you get from the dowsing societies, and then you run your finger around the colour disc, and with the dowsing rod in this hand, when your finger comes over the yellow, you get a reaction. People call this colour dowsing, but you could paint a colour strip on the floor and douse over it until you get the colour, boom, it's there, it's yellow. But it takes practice. I mean, I'm not an amateur dowser. I actually went through the schools of dowsing and even went to courses with Hamish Miller back in the 90s. I sort of learnt, and I've been tested and tried in different ways by different people, and it's something you practice. You have to practice a lot with dowsing. It's not something you can just pick up and be good at straight away. You have to practice it. But then for people like me who are doing this kind of work, I have to do this practicing, otherwise it'd be no good for anyone else. So what have we discovered? That these serpent lines or dragon lines have been depicted throughout time, controlled by man. And what Hamish and Paul found following the Michael line was that there's been some manipulation of these lines. In other words, where they should have been roaming free to one particular place, they've gone off course sharply to a new church, or a new sacred place, a theatre perhaps, where people gather because they seem to be connected with human consciousness. They want to connect with our energy, with our thoughts, because we are part of it. We are part of this earth. We are part of the karma of this earth. So we see these depictions often where man has control of the serpent. And in China, the emperor had jamasses, trained jamasses, to manipulate the flows of the dragon to channel into his sacred places, his palaces, his temples. So, and they've been doing that for thousands of years. So isn't it possible that our temples like Avebury and Glastonbury were deliberately channeling these energies? Maybe they had jamasses in prehistoric times, the druids, if you like, who were able to manipulate these currents through, focus of the mind, certain rituals. These dragons could be drawn in. I remember once going to what's they call indoctrination into the church. The initiation where at a certain age you can confirmation. Sorry, I saw a confirmation. That's a fascinating ritual took place in this church in the Cotswolds, where a bishop had to come in to do only a bishop can do the confirmation, and he stands at the font where we often find the serpent lines going through. And he said, to begin with, he sort of called upon the Holy Spirit, and he's drawing it like this, drawing in the Holy Spirit to this place. And while he was doing it, I was sort of dowsing, and I could see that the lines of energy were coming in as if he was deliberately pulling in the earth force. And this is some way of manipulating the energies for Christian use. The Celts themselves depict the dragon force, but in a kind of unified way, that they're all connected with the affinity symbol, as if the male and female dragons are all part of creation. This is something you'll see in churches and sacred places. And here, even in the old Irish Celtic, we see the triple dragon, and the man who controls the two serpents. Because you've got the alignment as well. A lot of people, Hamish and Paul, forgot about the alignment. They were more concentrating on the male and female serpents. But it's about the three. Because without the alignment, where would the serpents be? They had nothing to follow. So that has to have some substance, which a lot of lay hunters seem to have actually forgotten about. So I looked carefully at the alignment and discovered there's a lot of interesting sites here, and a lot of places where they cross, marked in red here, the male and female currents. Places that I took for granted before: Clitheroe, Kirby Longsdale, Wootton Warren. What are these places? Never heard of them before, but for most people. But of course we found that they were very special places indeed, because it's where the dragon force comes together. So there were places where either the geology is special, because for some reason they come together, go into the ground and absorb something there. But what? Why do they come together? What is that place? Why is that place so special? Why is Wootton Warren so special? Why is it one of the oldest churches in the Midlands? And the more you look into it, you realise and look at the geology and the lay of the land and the fording places. It's nature. Nature's created these places of power. Man has just recognised them, either from a trained geomancy point of view or through intuition, that he knew where to build, because the collective consciousness was telling him. And so, in a way, this line is a physical proof that this exists. All these places are places of power through the middle of Britain. It exists. It's not a figment of our imagination. But the lines of energy may be. But as I started to follow the lines from the south coast to the north and discover the connections, incredible connections with characters in history, I realised I had something to write about. And so it ended up starting to, well, I think for about 10 years I researched it without even thinking about writing a book. Then after that, another 10 years came out into a book. Lots of people say, where do they cross? Must be a great place of power. Actually, it's not, but it is. It's a place not far from Uffington, where the White Horse is, about a mile over here. And it's this pentagonal shaped field.
This is the Michael Line.
This is where the Michael Line and the Belinus Line cross. The two straight lines, not the serpents. So you remember I was telling you about the axes have to be important. So these are the great axes: the Michael Line, the Spine of Albion, Belinus Line. By the way, I call it the Belinus Line because that's what Guy Raglan called it, because he believed King Belinus, an Iron Age king, created this ancient straight road from the south coast to the north. And King Belinus was the son of Malmutius, who founded Winchester, which just happened to be on this line as well. So it's also known as the Belinus Line, or Belinus Line. So just to clear that point up. This particular field is where they cross, and we noticed in radar photographs that there's lots of archaeology in this field, some unusual structures. But here, just here, is a new eco-centre. Somebody who had a farm there a long time ago sold it, and it was bought by an organic farm association. They created an eco-centre with a conference place, and this kind of psychic garden, they call it, place of meditation. And the crossing point of the two lines is in the next field. So I spoke to her, I said, well, that's amazing, you've known about it. No. What are you talking about? That's Michael Line, Belinus Line, it crosses in that field. I had no idea. We just felt to produce it here. This is where, because they could have put the field, the garden on the other side of the farm, which wouldn't have been near the crossing point. And they had this great sort of stone, like a sort of, like a sort of cosmic axis stone, you know, marking this line itself and the crossing point. So again, we had an example of people working subconsciously with the collective consciousness. Now, the Isle of Wight, one of my favourite places, especially after doing all the research on the Belinus Line, on Spine of Albion. I knew a little bit about this place. All I knew is that the axis of this line comes in at sundown here, across here, up through Winchester. I didn't know much about its history. I knew that Brading was an ancient port, and that was close to the line, and the Roman villa, and Sandown, where the Apostle St. Paul was supposed to have arrived for the first time in Britain. But all these things were sort of coming out of the woodwork as we started to explore and meet people on our journey. And Caroline, my partner, and I started this incredible journey following these two lines from the cliffs, the Isle of Wight, back in the 2004, in earnest, if you like. So I discovered the Isle of Wight was once 3 islands, with a freshwater island, the main island, and Bembridge Island. And Bembridge Island has this unusual shape like a fetus. And Bembridge Island has the sort of the great Culver Cliffs down. It's the highest point of the island. Wherever you are on the island, this stands out like a head. So, you know, even the head is sort of is bulbous. And it feels like a sacred place. And at one time, the Brading Harbour was filled with water, but now this was all drained in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and it's all land now, and this is all joined up. But that's how it used to look a few hundred years ago, and how the line comes through today, connecting with Quor Abbey, a Cistercian monastery, and then became a Benedictine, Kemp Hill, a place of battle, or a place of meeting for warriors as well, East Ashy, a Saxon nunnery. So I had some meaty places the line was going through to have a look at. So we visited a lot of these sites, and we found some extremely interesting things. Connections with Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry II, the Angevin kings and queens. And this little island again came up, Bembridge, because we thought the currents must keep near the alignment, go out, the male and female, that is, around sundown, but no, they were both drawn to this island, and they leave through this island, or they actually enter through this island. And the male current was entering just around the Red Cliffs here, and the female current was coming through Culver Down, at the end of Culver Down. And where we dowsed it going off or coming into this part here, we looked down and there are caves below. And these caves are called the Nostrils. And we thought, this is strange, because why are they called the Nostrils? And then we realised that there's a figure that runs through the island called the Serpent. And it was found by Brian Innes back in the 70s. And he said that the geological ridge of greensand, which is this very powerful geology, iron magnetic stone, forms a serpent or an S shape through the island, and that the path of the moon follows that shape, that S shape, across the whole place. And so he felt that the Druids must have known this island was mimicking the path of the moon across the ecliptic. So the Isle of Wight must be an incredible temple in itself, and that's why there's hardly any stone circles on it. They didn't need to. The whole island was a temple. And it started out at this sort of serpent druid area. They had a temple up here and a well just below the hill. So these nostrils were at the actual nose of this Isle of Wight green sand serpent. And so we then discovered that inside the caves, those nostrils, because those caves are so hard to get into. You can only get into once or twice a year, very low tide, and then you're risking yourselves across the rocks, because this It floods easily here, so sometimes you can get over here and find yourself stranded because the tides come in here. So you're risking life and limb to get into these caves. So in a way, it felt like they were caves of initiation, like, you know, the warrior in the Grail has to risk his life to find the sacred cave. But some friends of ours did get in there and found this head of a dragon. You see its eye here, and its nose here, and the back of its head, and he's actually sitting on its neck, and it's protruding right out the cave, looking out to where this feminine dragon force is coming in. And the female dragon goes right through here, and this dragon-shaped rock is looking out towards where it comes in. That is a geological photograph of this green sand ridge and the nostrils here at the head of the serpent. And that's how it looks as if drawn out. And what we did find is that lots of places of power, all the Roman villas were actually placed upon this sandstone ridge, and the site of a stone circle, and the Mottistone Longstone, the only megalithic site on the island, is right on top of this green sand ridge. The most haunted houses at night and gorges is right on the sandstone ridge, with all kind of paranormal experiences they've had there. So the book really goes into a lot of the mystery of these places. It's not just following the lines, because along the way we start to talk about how the geology affects the people on the island, and how this island is like a mirror, one side equal to the other, and that there's light and dark going on the island. In fact, at the moment, people are growing for themselves on the island. It's becoming the eco-island of the future, self-sustaining. It's a place to look. I had a dream when I was 13 that I would one day be living near the Isle of Wight and be part of what's going on. I thought it was a load of rubbish, but it's actually come true. And the Isle of Wight is part of my teachings now, because it's part of this Spine of Albion. It's a very important place. This serpent mimics the Kundalini, because it's the serpent force within the island. It's the islands at the base of Britain, the very base, the coccyx, and it's actually shaped like a human coccyx. We discovered there was 33 places where the currents come together, all the way up the country, and we couldn't have made that happen by chance. It was just unbelievable. There's so many times it weaved in and out and crossed here and crossed there, and it's only at the end we thought 33 places of power up the Spine of Albion. There are 33 vertebrae in the human spine. Is that mimicking the earth and people? Is there a kind of connection between man and the land along this? That does say that Britain is kind of special. Somebody once said to me, well, why is it always happening here? Why is all this centre of learning going on here, the New Age? Why has Britain become the first? Why is so many things happening in history in this little island? There's something very powerful. And some people will say, you know, esoterically, it's the heart chakra of the world. Britain as an island, geologically, is interesting. If I showed you a geological map of Britain, showing you all the different layers, it's multicoloured. If I show you other countries around the world, not so coloured, not so multicoloured. So the geology reflects its power. And the Isle of Wight is a fascinating island which I could give you a whole lecture on. I haven't got time, but I'll just give a brief rundown. The male serpent passes through the neck of this, and the female through the eye, and there's the nostrils, connecting this kind of fetus island, which used to be called, well, it's now called Bimbridge Island, but it used to be called, put on the next one, Yarvaland, which the Y wasn't pronounced in the old times, like Avalond. And there is one researcher in America who believes that the Avalon of Arthur was actually this Bimbridge Isle, where Arthur was, his body was buried. There is a church of St John the Baptist at Yarvaland, which has kind of strange folklore, like it was moved by rollers from an ancient city that's submerged into the sea, all of which we talk about in our book. But the currents come together at one place of power on the Isle of Wight, only one place, and that's this tumulus. And it stands upon one of the highest points of the island, and you can see north as far as St Catherine's Hill, Winchester. And unfortunately, there's trees behind, so the view south is blocked. But at one time, this would have been a commanding place. And this tumulus dates from the Bronze Age, so this place of power where the two currents cross has been enhanced by some peoples of prehistoric times. And it's the only site in the island that has the devil associated with it. So obviously the Christian times, they actually associate this place with the devil to keep people away, because this is probably where they used to practice, and the Druids used to probably get together and commune or connect with the land at certain times of power, like the winter solstice, summer solstice, the equinoxes, lunar, etc. So then with this line of sight from there, we could see St Catherine's Hill. And these are like markers on the Spine of Albion. I bypassed so much just in flipping to St Catherine's Hill, but it's a huge story, and I'd like to give you a taste of all of it if I can. St Catherine's Hill is a place of power. Lots of people who live in the area of Hampshire know, especially Earth Mystery people, that this is an amazing sacred place. There's a labyrinth right on top of the hill, and inside the ramparts of an ancient sacred enclosure, or some people say a hill fort, but there was never any wars fought on this hill. It's a sacred enclosure. And behind the labyrinth you have this circle of ancient trees and a mound just behind Caroline's head there. And this is an ancient labyrinth based upon the Chart labyrinth. And some people say it was actually from a design that was originally placed there back in the time of the Knights Templar. And that's another big story we can go into. But what a great place to connect with the earth energy. If you want to connect with the Spine of Albion, and you live in the south, then how about walking the labyrinth? Because there is this great conjunction of power. The alignment itself touches the labyrinth, the currents itself. So here, by walking the labyrinth in a sacred way, you not just connect with the land, but you connect with the whole Spine of Albion. And lots of people, I sort of experimented and took people, I didn't tell them anything about this site, and says, well, walk the labyrinth and see what you find. And these were dowsers, and they would all find it's a real profound spiritual experience. And they also found these lines of power going through it. And also a site of an old chapel that was built by Henry of Blois, one of the Angevin bloodline, who I'd love to talk about, but it's too big a story. But the centre of the hill, behind the trees, behind Caroline, is where they cross, and they cross again, creating this Vesica Pisces, between the 2 points. And it's kind of like an elongated node, so yeah, St Catherine's Hill, great place to connect. Winchester Cathedral is the next place it crosses. And Winchester Cathedral is one of the great powerhouses of Britain. In long time ago, Winchester was the spiritual capital of England. It had 2 cathedrals in one square. One was about here. This one's slightly off at an angle. There was a monastery behind there, a nunnery, and lots of chapels. William the Conqueror's palace was over here at the end of this lane. His chapel still survives. But the cathedral itself, the main cathedral, is built on a swamp. And in fact, only the frontage that you saw before is on proper dry land. So a lot of people over the years, construction engineers, thought, what the hell were they playing at? Why did they build Winchester Cathedral on a swamp? Because in the 19th century, the whole thing started to crack and sink, and they had a diver to go underneath, as some of you might know, to put concrete underneath these great rafters, because they actually built it on a raft of oak trees. It's no wonder it was the tower fell in about 1200. But the wells under Winchester were regarded as extremely sacred, and the whole reason that place had power is because of the water. So they kind of knew that they wouldn't have that power if they built it on a dry land 100 yards further west or east. It had to be over these wells. And of course, there's Geoffrey Monmouth, the prophecies of Merlin talk about the 3 wells of Winchester, that when they flood, the end of the world will come. And 2 of them are under the cathedral. So let's hope they don't flood for a while. So another reason why they built the cathedral is perhaps because of this crossing of earth energies. The female current here seems to take the passive role of the male and continue straight through Winchester, through the watery sites and the site of Hyde Abbey, which was built by Alfred the Great. And the feminine current goes right across the site where Alfred was buried. But of course, just before the pilgrims, not the pilgrims, the desecrators during the time of the Reformation came to take away destroyed all the relics, they moved his body and buried it somewhere secret. So when we followed the male current through the city, it goes up to the old Winchester Castle, typical of the male energy, wanted to connect with King Arthur's great round table hall, the old House of Parliament of Britain. And then out through the theatre, they always tend to go through theatres, places where people come together, libraries. It was so common throughout when these currents are going through cities, to pass through theatres and libraries. And then eventually through St Bartholomew's Church, a male name for a male saint, for a male current. But the current actually passed through the apse of the church, just missing the high altar, which is unusual, and going through this kind of unmarked grave. And this of course, we discovered this about in the 90s, and we wrote about it, but we just discovered that they dug this unmarked grave up and found the bones of King Alfred under it recently. So that was kind of a good little plug for our book, but nobody would believe us. If you notice that the alignment, let's look at the alignment here, not forgetting alignment also goes through the theatre and the library, but also through St Lawrence's Church. In this grey hairy ear was the site of William the Conqueror's palace, which he built as soon as he got together and conquered England. He marched on Winchester and designed his palace, built his chapel, as if to stamp his authority on the energy matrix of Britain, and built his chapel, which today is all kinds of strange ceremonies going on, inside, and that chapel still exists. That's amazing. But also we got Cheney Court down here, which is on the alignment, and we discovered that Cheney Court was the site of a stone circle that existed long before the cathedral. So the alignment was still keeping to the old sites. But St Lawrence's still exists, and this is the chapel of William the Conqueror. Yeah, it's been renovated here in a brick square. Normally you see churches a sort of rectangular shape. Here we have a square shape. And these are the four great principles of Winchester. So those of you who want to connect with Winchester and connect with the power of the place, go into St Lawrence's. It's a little doorway off an alleyway not far from the cathedral. Hardly know it's there. You can't even see a church. It's just a doorway. You walk into another world. So further north, the next place of power I want to tell you about is Beacon Hill. Some of you might have heard of Beacon Hill. You pass it on the way to Newbury, the A34, isn't it? Like that. And it's a place, another of those places of power. When we arrived there, after finding the currents cross on the hill, we looked at the history of the place, and of course lots of crop circles have appeared around the hill and over the past 20 years. It also passed through Seven Barrows site, which is right through here. The current was coming right through, so actually the other side of the road connecting with the Barrows. And this is Beacon Hill behind. And from above it has this kind of hourglass shape, star shapes, kind of very strange hill fall. What's even stranger is that just by the crossing point here was this grave with railings around it, and we thought, we were sort of trying to poke, I couldn't get in, it was too high, but there was a plaque and you could just make out that here lies Lord Carnarvon, who discovered Tutankhamun. And I thought, wow, what's he doing next to a Spine of Albion node point on top of a hill fort? I mean, you'd imagine a man as famous as that, who discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, should be buried in the cathedral. But no, he's on a hill fort in the middle of nowhere, behind these railings, next to a node point of power. So you see that lots of strange things were happening as we were progressing up the line. I could talk more about the Carnarvons and their connection with the Spine of Albion and the occult, because they were totally into the occult, the Carnarvons. And of course we know that They lived just down from the hill in Highclere Castle, which of course is now known as Downton Abbey. But those of you who've been to Highclere will know the stories and see that the house is full of dragons. And you wonder why, because both dragons were sort of connecting with the Highclere estate and monuments. But these are the sort of crop circles that were appearing around Highclere and Beacon Hill. And this is, well, the sort of things that, because people associate some of the Carnarvons, the Earls of Pembroke, with the kind of Illuminati. But that's very, very, very faint trace history. I can't imagine crop circle makers knowing that history of their Illuminati sort of history and having this put into a crop circle nearby, as if subconsciously it was pointing to the fact that the controllers used to live here. Walbury Hillthorpe, just further up, is another place of power. But here we found that the currents coming up this great long barrow here, dating from 4000 BC, the line split and went around this gibbet. And this gibbet is still marking the site where people were hung. And that site of the energy coming from where these people were hung was still affecting this site and affecting the dragon lines, because the dragon lines avoided that site. And we found this, the same thing happens in Glastonbury Abbey on the Michael line. The Michael line somehow splits for a moment. It goes around something that it's trying to avoid. And we wondered if it was some kind of occult activity. But for here, it's a matter of the nature of the death of these people. But also around Walbury have been these dragon crop circles in the past few years. And since we had been to, it was after we'd done healing at that barrow, to try and correct the lines and trying to heal all the desecration of this ancient site, that these formations started to appear. As if they were kind of acknowledging that the feminine serpent, which is the one that goes through this place, was responding. And we found that following the feminine current right up the country, she had more damage to her than the male current. There was more occult activity, more desecrated places on her path than the male, which, same old story, isn't it? Do not keep the feminine energy low. And it was on our journey up from Winchester, we passed through this ancient Saxon tower, which is stood on a Roman tower, and it goes through at an angle. We always find that the male current seems to love towers, phallic symbols. Between this tower and this excellent round tower at St Mary's Church, we discovered the line, and it's crossing the M4, I think. But we couldn't, of course, like Lawrence says, there's a lot of paths you can't take, and you have to sometimes go to the other side of a place and then redouse it along the line until you get it again. And so we're marking out almost like a grid to see where the line is going, because we couldn't get access. But most of this line can be explored. There are footpaths that do follow the Spine of Albion, luckily. It seems like Mother Earth has allowed some access still into this modern times. But anyway, between these two churches towers that year, these two crop formations appeared of the face of Jesus or something, rather like the Shroud of Turin. And the line went right through this one, across the motorway, through that one, to the church with the round tower, which is just here. And this happened 2 days after we'd followed and activated that line. And again, the earth seemed to respond. Now, some people say, yeah, these were definitely fakes. And, well, even so, what made the guys who created these circles do them either side of the motorway in those places, right on our line that we discovered a couple of days before? So were they connecting with us, through the collective consciousness again? This is what we were discovering all the way up the line. And of course, Crooked Soli was one of the most impressive crop circles of its time, showing the great DNA and connection, and the Grail. This is John Michel's beautiful words, which talk about this connection between the intelligences that make these crop circles. Can you read that? If you can't, it says, some intelligent, human, alien or spiritual, is in the process of communication. It is exposing us to a course of re-education, beginning with the symbols of sacred knowledge and wisdom. Clearly expressed in its design are certain numerical symbols that are known esoterically as the keys to creation. They are also keys to that universal science associated with the Holy Grail. From time to time, it is revealed again, and when that happens, culture and the human spirit are renewed, and life on earth is restored to its natural state as a reflection of paradise. And yeah, that's the way John Michel used to write beautifully, but most people don't really understand what he's saying there because it's lost. But I think it's a beautiful way of describing the connection of crop circles with the land. And our current goes right through the site where this occurred. And of course our lines are rather like DNA. And at first, this crop circle first made me think about the spiralling, not going like a caduceus around the axis, but actually spiraling around it like DNA. So where the two great dragons come together north of there, and where the Michael and the Mary dragons come together is at this site here. And of course many of you know it's the White Horse of Uffington, but it's always been known from ancient times the dragon, because just down here is Dragon Hill. And it's the dragon force that is drawn to this place for a reason. Well, it's on a upper green sand ridge, the same power stone as that on the Isle of Wight. But there's something more special about it. We've got Wayland's Smithy down here, which a feminine current comes through, and then passes through the entrance of Uffington Castle, crosses with the feminine current in the middle, and then goes through a burial site, down the White Dragon itself, through Dragon Hill, and into the Woolstone Springs, which is one of the tributaries of the River Thames, one of the sources, if you like. The male current keeps in its straight roll through the north end to the south entrance, through the side of a spring, which is unusual for male comfort, and then through Dragon Hill, and then off to Farringdon Folly, another masculine feature in the landscape. So, but the Michael and Mary lines are north and south of here. The Mary line crosses our line in a church dedicated to St Mary at Uffington, and the male current crosses through a St Michael church in Blambolton. So it's interesting that we came together with the Michael and Mary in churches. The Michael in the St Michael's church and Mary in the St Mary church. You couldn't make these things up. Wayland's Smithy is an interesting story there, because the first time we went to Wayland's Smithy to douse the feminine serpent through that mound was in 2006 in August. And we doused it out the back of the mound into a field, and we walked, or we sat right at the side of that field, and we felt there was some kind of people working with the energies and not doing a very good job of it. So we just asked, the great force of creation to send powers of healing along this line to clear any negativity, to help with what's going on, the new energies that are coming in. And next day this appeared in that very field that we were looking into. Now, a lot of people say this was a man-made, but to me it doesn't matter. The very fact that it appeared in that field the day after that we'd been working with the line, nature or Earth, Mother Earth has responded in either way. It either produced it or it got somebody else to produce it. But what's interesting, it was all about time and the illusion of time. The Rollright Stone Circle, many of you know, is the nearest megalithic site to London. It's actually on the Spine of Albion, although it's a little bit off, but the two currents are drawn towards it, magnetised towards this site. This I discovered back in the 90s, but crop circles have appeared all around the Rollright stones over the years, especially since a lot of people have been working with it as it's part of the Spine of Albion. And of course, this is a site where the male and female cross. Not in the circle, as I first imagined, not at the Whispering Knights, which is a great long barrow, not at the Kingstone, but on a kind of raised platform, natural earth mound, just past the Kingstone. And I thought when I first discovered this, my dowsing was rubbish. This doesn't make sense. I'm not connecting with any features, even though the feminine current skirts the stone circle through the moon area of the circle. The male current does go through the Whispering Knights and passes through the Kingstone, So I thought, that's all right, but what about this crossing place? What's so special about it? And here it is. Somebody has actually marked it with a group of stones and used it as a place to sit and have a campfire, as if people were naturally drawn to the place of power. And then I discovered that all the folklore of this site, written over the centuries, talks about this mound being the Druids, the Archdruids' barrow, where the equivalent to the Archbishop of Canterbury had lived, and that was a very important place because he was also buried there. But there's also sleeping warriors under that mound, that ready to be awakened in England's time of need, rather like the Arthur and his knights. But these are warriors. So I knew that this sort of theme echoed in other places all the way up the line. It went through, they crossed places, sleeping warriors. The sleeping warriors was an allegory of sleeping energy, as if something had been tuned down in prehistoric times, that they knew these places of power would be misused, the age of Kali was coming. And so the dreams I was having, because like Lawrence, I slept on Dragon Hill at Uffington, and I had a dream about the Druids closing down the site because they knew, rather like in the Lord of the Rings, that there's going to come a time of evil or negativity. And so these sites must be protected, and so a lot of these sites had the sleeping warrior, and Uffington was another place of the sleeping warrior. And then, of course, the other place I want to tell you about north of there, and I've passed a lot of important places of power, but never mind, Stratford is another key place in the Spine of Albion. Well, we know Stratford's the place where Shakespeare was born and died, and buried in this church here. But it's amazing how this came about. I didn't know anything about, I visited Stratford as a boy with my father on a coach trip from Blackpool, but I'd never actually been to it as an adult. And so for the first time I arrived in Stratford, it was a very dark evening. I'd been up on Meon Hill, dowsing the currents, and followed one of them down from Meon Hill right into the outskirts of Stratford to this church. And the gates were closed, we weren't allowed in, but it said the Holy Trinity. So I wrote that down, Holy Trinity, must check that out next time in the area, because the dragon current was going right into it. So I got back home from Stratford, which is a long way to Dorset, where I now live. And work got in the way, and about 6 months later I thought, well, I must go back to Stratford. But I just read an article by an inspirational lady who invented all these amazing angel cards. And she sort of founded the Care City sort of organisation, and she'd had this vision of a line of power that is to do with the power of Albion. It goes from the Isle of Wight through Winchester, through Uffington, Rollrack Stones, and then through the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. And she wasn't a dowser. This was just a dream, an inspiration. And so I looked, I thought, Holy Trinity, so I got my notes out, Holy Trinity, oh my God, this lady had a vision of this place. So when I arrived there, I found both currents were coming together inside this church, and I thought, I wonder if it's going through Shakespeare's grave, but unfortunately not. It actually crosses right under the tower. But there's a whole story about that, which I can't go into at the moment, but here's Shakespeare's grave. Now what I discovered was that, first of all, anyone who knows about Shakespeare and reads his epitaph, it's supposed to have been written by him, and realises something not quite right. Because it says, good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust enclosed here, blessed be the man who spares these bones, and cursed be he who moves my bones. I mean, that's not something you imagine from the greatest poet, writer in English history. So, and there's a curse on there. There's a curse that's saying anybody who touches this grave will be cursed. So it's never been touched, interestingly. It makes you wonder if Shakespeare's really under there. But so in the book we go through a lot of this conspiracy of Shakespeare, and we had some real fun, because following the lines through Stratford took us to some of these places connected with the Guild of the Holy Cross. And this same mysterious Guild of the Holy Cross was seen to have a history going back into time beyond, according to some writers, were associated with the foundation of Birmingham. And they constructed a lot of the major sites in Stratford. And they used to hold a St George festival, and they honoured St George every year on St George's Day. And there was a great procession, probably with a giant or a dragon, through the streets, and we discovered the path they take follows the path of the feminine serpent. So this seemed a dragon parade following St George. We thought St George is a symbol of Britain. He slayed the dragon or controlled the serpent, but then it's Christianity over the dragon. But then St George's, Shakespeare was born on St George's Day. Oh, that's interesting, because now the St George festivals have stopped and they've become Shakespeare festivals. So they follow the same route on the day of Shakespeare. Instead of St George, they're now celebrating Shakespeare. But the other weird thing is I discovered that Shakespeare died on St George's Day. So we have a man that may be fictional, that's born and died on St George's Day in a place where St George's festivals were carried out for centuries, on the centre and the spine of England. So there's something subliminal here that's working with us. But we talk about more in the book. Wootton Warren, some of you might know from Birmingham here. Any of you visited this church? No? Wootton Warren is on one of the oldest sites. It was an Iron Age site. A Saxon monastery was built here, but is known as the Saxon Sanctuary. Inside there's this little square, almost like little tomb, and it's got 2 windows and 2 doorways, a little altar in the middle that you have to walk around. It's a little room, but both currents are coming together inside that little room. And we wondered why, until we looked at the history boards and saw that this place has a history going back to the Bronze Age, and it was on a fording place. Lawrence was talking about fording places. We discovered that many of the sites on the line itself, the lane, crosses key fording places right up the spine of Britain, including the Thames at Radcott Bridge, one of the oldest bridges across the Thames. So here we had an ancient fording place, a place of power, interesting geology. We've got so much at Wootton Warren. Up to Barbeacon, in the Midlands. Some of you will know Barbeacon, no doubt, if you're from the Midlands. It's one of the most famous beauty spots. Somebody thought to build this incredible sort of, little temple on top there, and create a mound. But the actual place of power was in the trees, the Scott plantation. So it was kind of a secret place of power on top of this very populated hill in the summer and the springtime. So, and you had to sort of go over the railings to get to it, which is kind of interesting because all the hill has been reshaped and shaped over different times. It used to have a sculptured hill, like a hill fort, and a stone circle where the reservoir now stands. Of course, they dug out half the hill, destroying all its archaeology, to create this tank, if you like, tank of water. So again, we found an ancient site on the Spine of Albion that's been not desecrated but destroyed in some way, but the power is still there. The archaeology talks about the Iron Age sites here and the megalithic stones that were once on the hill. And also folklore says that the Archdruid lived on Barbeacon, and that his route from the Archdruid site at Rollrights came through Barbeacon to Castle Rings, which is the largest hill fort in the Midlands further north of here. And also the next place we found the crossing of these places, the crossing of the dragon lines. So we was kind of following the Archdruid sites up the middle of the country. And there we see Castle Ring, its great rampart all the way around. I'm sure some of you have been around Castle Rings. Many might not know that there's a great crossing of earth energies right in the middle there. So I asked again whether, this is by chance that this great hill fort is here to be a fort for war and a sacred enclosure for a place of power. It's up to you to decide. Lots of people I know go to Castle Ring, find it's a very spiritual place. It's not a place built for war. It might have been reused in a time of war, but not originally built as a place of war. It's the same with Chartley. Chartley looks like this great place, a castle, strong fortifications, but there's a great mound here, a great mound that the Normans built upon. The Normans were very good at building towers or planting their authority over our sacred sites by putting towers on top of the old Druid mounds. And this was one such place, and this came through dreaming, because we got rather lost in the great wilderness of Cannock Chase, and we thought we'd kind of dream the next results. And so with our friend Darryl from the Midlands, who was a bit of a psychic, we decided to dream and go out to the landscape and see if we could actually find the next place of power. And we both had dreams of castles on top of hills that were originally sun temples in prehistoric times. And they had to do with the Egyptians. So this is all coming into the green zone, Andrew Collins sort of stuff, which is all very interesting. But Darryl felt that it must be, what's the name? Stafford Castle, because that sort of matched his dream, because he also saw a reception area. So we went up to Stafford Castle, and sure enough, it's a long castle on a mound that could have been prehistoric. So, but then we got the dowsing rods out. There was no sign of occurrence. None of the male or female currents were there. So I said to Darryl, "This is not the place." He said, "But everything matches my dream." And I said, "Yeah, well, it's not working out with the lines, so maybe it's a bad day for us." So we came back again, dowsed again, nothing, because we often did that, recheck our dowsing. And then a crop circle appeared for the first time in Staffordshire in like years. It's very rare you get crop circles. And it appeared right below Chartley Castle in around that time, 2006. And this great wheel of power, like you get at the no point. And that brought our attention, because Chartley Castle's out of bounds. It's a private place. It's not a place you can look up in a book and think, right, we'll go there and see if it's that place. That's why we missed it, really. It's private. And we wasn't looking at that area of Staffordshire. And so, but we started to look at it when the crop formation appeared. And at that particular time, August 2006, one had appeared within that week, one at the Rollright Stones, at Uffington, and St Catherine's Hill. They all appeared along the Spine of Albion. It's as if the circle makers were following us, all trying to tell us where the next place of power was. So Chartley was one of those interesting sites that we found through a dream initially. Now the Cloud is a place of power that used to have a rock pinnacle up here. And from a distance it would have looked like Glastonbury Tor. But now it's been quarried away like a lot of the places of power. In the dip here was one of the greatest long barrows in the whole of Britain, called the Bridestones. And it was the longest long barrow. It had a chamber inside that you could stand up in and walk around it. It was far larger than Kennet Long Barrow. But unfortunately, the building of a viaduct and the railway lines, they took a lot of the stone away, leaving just these stones here. But this is a real place of power. The folklore, the eyewitness accounts of strange phenomena at this site is unbelievable. People have seen balls of light here, white ladies, all kinds of phenomena. And it's related to the iron-rich stone here in the geology, but also the power of the energy lines that are going into this site. It is one of those places to sit and dream. I'm sure if Lawrence gets here, he'll be dreaming at this site, no doubt. And but this is how it used to look 100 years before. So it's kind of shaped like an oval, and it had this was an interior chamber you could literally walk around in. And it had this unusual aperture with a hole in the middle and a hole here. So you had to actually crawl through two holes to get into the inner chamber, like passing through into the womb of the goddess through the opening. So it's a very symbolic site of the goddess, and it's called Bride Stone, the old goddess name of Britain. So here we have this is what happens at the cloud. The feminine current comes through the Bride Stones, goes up the sort of the ridge of the hill into the site of a prehistoric village to the trig point, near the trig point at the top. And the Maelstone coming up through Mow Cop, which is that great monument on the hill. The Cat Stones, which still and two prehistoric stones that still survive on the edge of the hill. Crosses the alignments to a trig point. So, Big Fenton Farm. Wow, what a story! I've got time for that. But yeah, from the cloud we discovered these incredible relationships with other parts of the landscape through the equinox. The Bride Stones. From St George's Asbury, the sun rises out of the Bride Stones at the equinox. At Marton Church, this great mound of black and white church, at the winter solstice sunrise, you can see the sun coming out of the notch where the Bride Stones are. So they talk about sacred alignments in this country. The cloud has more than any other site in the whole of Britain where you can see all these things, from St Edward's Church in Leek, Edward Confessor Church in Leek. From the graveyard there, back in the 70s, you could see the sun rise from behind a cloud, go in again because of the shape of the hill, and then come out again and create a double sunset. And that was one of the biggest attractions in that area for a long time. And it only happens on the summer solstice. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on around the cloud. If you go up to the cloud and look around the hill itself, you'll see all kinds of ancient prehistoric carvings. It's a fascinating place. And then further up the Spine of Albion, we passed through a place called Caverswell, which I haven't mentioned today, but I thought I'd mention it because it's just it's amazing 13th century castle that has a moat around it, drawbridge, circular turrets around it. It's like a fairy tale castle, like something out of Hansel and Gretel or Harry Potter. And unfortunately today it's abandoned. But it's been a hotel in its time. It's been a private home. It was a home of the line of King Arthur. What was the name of the family that had it? That Craddock. Yeah, the Craddock family. And Craddock is to do with Caractacus, or the line of Caractacus there. Sorry? Somebody knows more than me, I suppose. But anyway, I arrived at this house and said, look, your house is on this great Spine of Albion, and one of the currents is coming through here as well. There must be something special about it. And they said, oh yes, it is. There's a little bit of a history book here, and this lady who owned the house gave me the history book. And it says that this was the court of King Arthur, and that this was where he met his wife Guinevere. In the myths, of course, in the local myths. But then we found Arthur in many places, as Lawrence said. And there's something about, because it's a feminine current and the female current was met, we felt it was an allegory of the energies that were going on. And Arthur was in the Spine of Albion, a key figure that denotes places of power. So it's kind of the etheric Arthur that we were following. So those sort of things are precious, the eureka moments because we found Arthur sites all the way up before we got to Caverswell, and when we discovered it was a court of Arthur. And of course nobody else had known about that. It was one of those eureka moments that highlight our journey. Alderley Edge is another place of sleeping warriors. St. King Arthur and 12 knights and their horses all sleep beneath this great ridge that overlooks the plains of Manchester and towards the Midlands. And it is, you feel like you're on the edge of the world. You've come through all these hills from Staffordshire through Cheshire, and then suddenly, bang, you get to this great edge. And they call it the edge, and down there it's all flat until you get up to the Cumbria. So it's like it's like entering another realm, and it's the end of this there's no point that happens on this edge. And this is where the sleeping warriors are, and right under the castle rock where we found the node point, as well as Holy Wells and the place of the power. And again, they felt that one local author says it's not Arthur's Knights, it's a chakra point. Somehow it's a place of power. And he was writing this back in the 80s, long before we discovered that this was on the Spine of Albion. So other people have been tuning into this place as a place of power and had a feeling. So when I said, oh, I showed them what I found, that makes sense. Alder Edge is a great place to explore. Whalley in Lancashire is just a little village, stone-built village with a very, very ancient church. But it was on our line, and we thought, what's important about this? We discovered geographically it's at the centre of Britain without its outer islands. And right in the churchyard are these crosses depicting the Axis Mundi. So it's interesting that we found 3 crosses depicting the Axis Mundi in a place that is at the centre of Britain. So it seemed that the ancients understood the geographical placing, and they built an abbey, Whalley Abbey, next to it. But it's the church where the energies want to connect with. And right on the Axis Mundi cross shows it is a saint holding 2 serpents, controlling the energy at that site. Whalley also had a stone of power that was found underneath the church, and we feel it's an omphalos stone. It's a black stone. Nobody knows. It was found under the foundations. It has strange markings on it. There's all kinds of ritual activity going on at that centre, in the centre of Britain. Centres are important, and guess what we found in the church window? King Arthur. What's he doing in the little church of Whalley, in the middle of Lancashire? Clitheroe, another great place of power where the currents cross, this time, strangely enough, in the keep, the smallest keep in Britain. Currents are coming together. Why? This is what we had to look into, and we came up with some incredible discoveries as well, including the currents were coming through a brand new labyrinth that had just been built below that castle keep. Somebody there felt inspired to create this, didn't know why. And of course we're coming through the trees here, following the energy right through this, and we thought, this is definitely mankind working with the collective consciousness. Kirby Lonsdale, another great place, one of the most beautiful views in the country from here. But there's a mound here built by William Rufus and the Angevin kings. What's he doing? Building a mound here, collecting the chi in the places of power. Another fascinating site. Shap, the prehistoric centre of Britain, equivalent to Avebury. They were both serpent temples, having this great avenue, a central circle, 400 metres across, a circle at the front, a circle at the bottom, connecting these 2 great avenues, one of Shap granite, one of limestone, and a great tumulus which had been flattened that acted like a Silbury hill. The Shap was a fascinating place, but even in 1755, all that was left of them was stumps. They'd actually dynamited these stones to make chimney pieces. So all that was left is a couple of stumps. So one of our greatest monuments, and the weirdest thing we discovered is facing this avenue, the whole procession is to the north. And that got us to think about our line and its direction, and we realised then, using computer graphics, that our line's heading towards setting stars of Cygnus, and that there was something significant about Cygnus and why they orientated the Spine of Albion to it, which is another huge story. Carlisle, I'm rushing on a bit because I've only got a few minutes left. Carlisle is the capital of the north, a great citadel centre, crossing place of power in the cathedral. And interesting enough, when we first discovered this, that's how big the church was. That's how big it is now. It's nothing like it used to be. But right below the place of power, above are these male and female dragons kissing, as if the stonemasons understood that there was a crossing point here of male and female energy. This one of those wonderful, wonderful things you find when you follow earth energies and go out into the land and walk the lands and see these places and look for the clues, as the old stonemasons used to leave us something, like here at Arthurette, where Arthur fought his battle north of Carlisle, where Arthur, one of the Arthurs, whether it be the etheric Arthur, the celestial Arthur, or the Celtic Arthur, or King Lauritz Main's Arthur, had a battle here, and it's known as Arthurette, which is Arthur's head. And Welsh is spoken in this area right up until the 7th century. So that the sort of concept of Arthur has always been in the Welsh lands. But when we followed the current here, we was expecting to go through the body of the church. It weaved across through this point in the tower, and right underneath this Grail figure. And this was the last place in England before we entered the realms of Scotland. And it's, for some reason, halfway up the tower, they'd carved a Grail into the church, right through where the current goes through. Interesting. So the castles were also interesting, all the way it was passing through. Carlisle Castle was Arthur's Camelot, according to some writers. Winchester Castle was also Arthur's Camelot, according to some writers. Caverswall Castle was where Arthur met Guinevere. We have a prehistoric Arthur's Round Table that the currents go through. The Arthurette Church, where he's supposed to be buried. The Baden in Winchester, Badbury Hill, Oxon, all places associated with Arthur. Cadimure Hill in Scotland. Sleeping places, the Black Isle. Interesting, the Black Isle had this kind of symmetry with the White Isle, the Isle of Wight. They were both places of occult power. People practice the occult there and worship nature still on the Black Isle, just like the Isle of Wight. Alderley Edge, Rollright Stones, all sleeping places of power. And as we got further north, we ended up going through Finn sites. And Finn was the Celtic Arthur, who had warriors with him, 12, and he slept in places of power in cliffs and caves. So, and this is where we had this amazing journey through Scotland, which unfortunately I haven't got time to tell you all about. But yeah, I know some of you would probably love me to tell you about the interesting sites here, but it's all in the book. And maybe another time I'll talk about the Scotland site, because a few weeks back we went up to Scotland, gave a whole lecture for an hour, nearly 2 hours, just on what happens in the amazing journey through Scotland. So, just to wind up, Dunfermline Abbey, Winchester Cathedral, Fontevraud Abbey, Eleanor of Aquitaine. There's a huge connection with these places. The alignment itself goes through the abbeys, all these abbeys. Fontevraud Abbey was the burial place of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. And Henry II rebuilt Winchester, rebuilt Carlisle, and his relatives had a lot to do with Dunfermline Abbey and St Margaret. So we had this connection with the Angevin line, and this is how we felt there was kind of some manipulation of power, that these people knew about this line. And you see here how it goes through Bale, Fontevraud, where the Angevin kings were buried, the religious site of it, and then Poitiers, where Eleanor of Aquitaine had her court and the troubadours used to meet. And then it goes right through down to Majorca. And a few years ago, Caroline and I was dowsing the currents. We want to find out where the feminine current comes into Majorca. So we drove along up with a dowsing rod sticking out the window, and we came to a place called Dea, and the rods reacted. And we followed it up into the town, right through the area where Robert Graves wrote The Queen, the White Goddess. So that's interesting, because he's also connected with sites of power in Wales, as Lawrence said. But all these sites are connected with Angevin kings and princes. Radcliffe Hall, the currents come together there. What's this? It's just a tower in the middle of a field. Nothing, just estates around it. Why do the currents come together there? The Radcliffe family were introduced by the Angevins into that area. They founded Ordsall Hall. Ordsall Hall was the oldest site in Manchester. From Ordsall Hall, the Radcliffes reigned in their power. They brought over Flemish weavers in the medieval times, and it's the descendants of those weavers who became the great machinists that fired the great power of Manchester, and Manchester becoming one of the great weaving places in the world. So the Angevins seem to have an effect upon all these places, including Birmingham, which I'd love to give a whole lecture on Birmingham. But that we have done in Aston Church not long ago, because there's so many interesting places in Birmingham the line connects with the currents, such as the Lunar Society, Keepley people who fired the Industrial Revolution. That's another story. So, that's it. Thank you.
I have to thank Gary. I said it to him earlier. It's beautiful to think about a bloke saying, "Caroline, get the rods. We're going out Saturday morning."
No, Caroline was doing as much dowsing as me.
And that's beautiful, you know, having a hypothetical nuance come to mind, and then saying, right, for the next few weekends, we're just going to follow our due diligence and put together a synopsis of our thoughts, and then here you are.
It worked better using male and female on this side than just a male, because people like, I know that Hamish found a lot of things, but it worked. He found that he could dowse better with his wife.
Yeah.
So using the male and the female, connecting with your own male and female, was how we really managed to do this research and finish it.
Oh, that's everything.
Yeah,
shopping, everything. Bloke on his own, he's going to go to the pub after an hour and a half.
Exactly. Yeah, he's going to be in his masculine too much. Yeah.
There is a sort of weirdly interconnected common meme where you've got John Boyd talking about Schauberger, looking at how energy of water is dissipated by using the S.
Yeah.
So the way nature dissipates extra energies by creating that little S bend and the fort or whatever, yeah? And then you've got Dave looking at electrical energy not running through the wires but actually orbiting the central axis, and then the ley lines seeming to follow the same. So we're sort of like putting together a thought process of an alternative view of alternative energies, all interacting in a similar way with this helical sort of spiral, and then us trying to understand how can we start. I bet you dose.
I do.
All the time.
I just want to say also before we go that we're offering a discount on the books there. Anybody wants a book? The normal on sale for nearly £18, but they're going for £15.95. So.
Okay, so are you here all day or?
Yeah, we're around for a while. Yeah, we do have to head back, so we've got another gig tomorrow. So. Okay. But we'll be around for the next couple of hours anyway.
Well, we've got an hour and a half till dinner, and then for dinner, and then Tony Gosling's in here after the break. So let's say thanks again to Gary.